Hi, I'm Mark Anderson, and I'm going to talk to you today about information architecture provisioning. We have different options we can use to provision different types of information architecture. In this session, I'm going to talk about the differences between the content type hub, site designs, and PnP provisioning templates. First, a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder and president of Sympraxis Consulting. We're a 6-person company in the Boston area, though we're a virtual organization. We really pretty much live in the Microsoft 365 platform. So this is what we do every single day. I've been both a developer, we used to call ourselves programmers, and management consultant. So I sort of look at things from lots of different perspectives and try and solve problems regardless of what technologies are important. I wrote a little library called SP Services years ago, and I'm still resting on my laurels for that. I'm also the administrator of a newish community effort called the Microsoft 365 Community Content. I'll have a link to that later in the session at the end. And I've also been an MVP for a long time, which means I get to hang out with people who are way smarter than I am and talk about all kinds of interesting things. Some of the greatest people I know in this community are Microsoft MVPs, and it's an honor to be amongst that team, or that group. And finally, I'm a member of the PnP team, and that Microsoft 365 Community Content Repo lives in that under those auspices. But enough about me. So when we talk about architecture in SharePoint in particular, there are a lot of different things that we can cover. I find that if I try and cover all of it in any one session, it's just way too much to go over. What I really want to talk about in this session is how do we instantiate site columns and content types, though I'll touch on things like navigation and site topology a little bit here. The key to me about information architecture in the context of any given site is to be using site columns and content types wisely within that site and then across sites that have consistent characteristics. So those sites might be project sites or property sites or sites that have to do with legal matters. Any kind of site where there is some repetition or repeatability of the information architecture that you want to be sure that you instantiate across sites so that you can provide some consistent value in metadata collection and therefore the findability of your content. So the 3 methods that I'm going to talk about a bit today have some pros and cons. The first one is the content type hub. It's been around forever, and forever is a really long time, but definitely since SharePoint 2010. The great thing about it is that it just works. It does what it's supposed to do, and what that is to syndicate site columns and content types from the content type hub to all of the sites in your tenant. Power users can do their work in that content type hub. It's a classic SharePoint site, and you can go in and configure your site columns and content types and then click the publish button and radio button, and those content types will be pushed out across all of the sites in your tenant. The downside of that is that the publishing process, the process of actually doing that syndication out to all of the existing sites, is really a black box, and it's very unpredictable. There's a timer job that runs sometime, and that means that your content types may be pushed out immediately. It may take a couple of days. Unfortunately, it's just very unpredictable, so it doesn't make for a very real-time, lots of iteration kind of environment. It didn't matter so much in the old days because we tended to have a much lower number of site collections, which we now know as modern sites. The content type hub only helps with content types and therefore site columns, which content types are made out of. And then the syndication story is a good one if you want the same information architecture on all of your sites, but in almost no cases is that the case. The syndication from the content type hub goes to all sites equally. Every content type you publish goes to every site. And now that we have a very flat site topology, that really doesn't make that much sense. The next method is site designs. One of the best things about site designs is that we can instantiate the site design based on whatever design we want. We can set up site scripts that are bundled together into a site design, and they can do things like create site columns and site navigation and all sorts of things like that. And then site owners, the site owner who actually is creating the site, can apply that site design right through the UI. It's very simple to apply the site design. There are a lot of flexible use cases here. You might apply a site design to indicate a type of site, like a project site or a property site or a legal matter site, or just different site artifacts. So for instance, you could have a site design that just has just instantiates a status update library or a list, so that you're actually building components into your sites one by one, as opposed to creating a design that sort of implies its function. Some of the downside of that is that there's some coding knowledge. I mean, we can build out a site that shows that has the artifacts and the information architecture that we want, and export it into JSON files, JavaScript object notation files, and then we can instantiate the site design or register that site design, but we have to use PowerShell. So there's a little bit of programming and coding knowledge involved, and you have to have at least SharePoint administrator permissions in order to create the site design. You can't work with any pages. Unfortunately, site designs have not gotten to the point where we can say, let's put this web part on the home page. And I think that almost every time that I'm working with a client and we're trying to set up a consistent site design in a generic sense, the first thing we want to be able to do, or second thing we want to be able to do maybe, is to add a couple of web parts to that home page configured in a certain way that reflects that particular site's identity. Unfortunately, we can't do that with site designs. And as far as I can tell, site designs came out it's either 2 or 3 years ago. I'm sorry if I'm a little hazy on that. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of development after that first launch. There have been some changes that Microsoft has made primarily to serve some of their first party, some of their own requirements, but I don't see site designs becoming a more mature provisioning product in a sense, unfortunately. And I would love to see it go further, but I'm just not seeing that happen. So to me, it sort of feels like it's in stasis. It's a little bit of an abandoned set of technologies. I had a lot of hope for it when I first saw it. So that brings us to our third option, which is the PnP, patterns and practices, provisioning templates. This is more of an open source set of tools. It's been developed under the PnP auspices, which means that it's both sanctioned by Microsoft, but also driven by the community to some degree as open source. So some of the best things about this is that provisioning engine is actually actively developed. There is an active community working on enhancing or fixing bugs. And that means that if you are looking for something, you can raise an issue, make some suggestions, maybe even contribute to the repo yourself, and it will continue to get better. The coverage is much wider. We can do a lot more things with PnP provisioning templates than we can with site designs. And obviously the content type hub is focused entirely on content types for the most part. We can also work with pages, so that gives it a big win over site designs. Some of the downsides are it requires even more coding knowledge. So we can set up a JSON file that sort of drives how our exports from existing sites work, what sort of artifacts we want to export, which come out in the form of XML files. And then we need to run some PowerShell in order to apply the template to the sites that we want to have look and feel the same way. We can only apply PnP provisioning templates with PowerShell. There is no UI for them. We can build some automation into the process. So for instance, if we add an item into a list, we can kick off an automation process that, depending on what you're doing, you might use several different mechanisms, and that could automate the process such that there doesn't have to be a UI, or you don't have to run PowerShell manually each time, but it's a PowerShell driven process. Finally, last slide before I move into the demo of the session. We have another look at sort of how do we compare these different methods, and I think I probably touched on a lot of this, but you'll see that creating site columns and content types is really all that the content type hub does. One of the downsides even of the content type hub is that we can't use lookup columns. We can't have a lookup column that we create in the content type hub and then syndicate out, because the content itself is in that hub, and therefore it doesn't, people don't have permission to use it in their own site. All of these provisioning methods can certainly give us site columns and content types. As you move into site designs, you see a lot more capabilities come in. We can add and remove navigational elements. We can create lists and libraries. Lots of the time we want, when we create a site that's going to have a common sort of use as a bunch of other sites, we want to have some lists and libraries that are containers into which we're going to pour our content. We can apply theming, branding, and logo. We can add solutions, meaning things like a SharePoint framework web part that your organization has built. You can instantiate or activate that solution in your site using a site design or a PnP provisioning template. You can trigger a flow from either one of those two methods, which means that you have another hook to accomplish some other things that might not be supported by the schemas of site designs and PnP provisioning templates if you need to go a little bit further. There's some other settings you can set in site designs, things like the regional setting for the site, whether or not guest access is allowed, and things like that. You can also add users to groups, so you can set up the permission structure of your site based on some parameters if you want to do that with your site design or PnP provisioning template. Now you notice applying through the UI, we have a little bit of a change in that row of the slide. We can apply things through the UI using the content type hub and site designs. We can apply a site design, of course, once it's been instantiated, once it's been registered. But the PnP provisioning templates don't have a UI. There's nothing that you can no page you can go to in order to run a PnP provisioning template, though you can automate something so that it effectively feels like there's some sort of UI or some user action that drives it being run. Then PnP provisioning templates sort of take off from there. You can create and configure pages. You can set property bag values on the site, meaning adding additional metadata to the site itself. You can add files to the site. So for instance, if you wanted to add a number of templates or a number of sort of bare bones files that people are going to use in the course of the unit of work, you can do that with a PnP provisioning template. And then the PnP provisioning templates let you do a bunch more, but I'm going to sort of leave it there as much more exclamation point. So I'm tending to use PnP provisioning templates more now than the other two methods, because it seems as though it's positioning me to be able to do more and more as the need arises from the same base set of capabilities. I'm sitting on top of an engine that is being enhanced all the time, and even if I'm only doing some basic things like creating a few lists and libraries, by using a PnP provisioning template, I've got a basis, a foundation upon which I can do a lot of these other things as well. We've talked about some of the capabilities behind site designs and PnP provisioning templates, so let's jump into a couple of demos and take a look at what they actually can do. First, let's lay the groundwork for what we're actually trying to accomplish. I've got a site here called Information Architecture, and I've built a little bit of a foundation. So you'll notice that when I go into this property library, I've got the content type inspection report, and I'm grouping by that. If I look at the library settings, I can see the content types that are allowed in this particular library, the inspection report, and the floor plan, as well as just the out-of-the-box document. So I've got a little bit of setup there. These inspection report and property photos are site content types, so they're defined only in this particular site, and you'll notice that I've got them in some groups called demo and then demo property, just for easy organization. And so I've sort of laid the groundwork for what I want to do here. A couple of specific site columns, nothing fancy, but the kinds of things that we do when we build information architecture all the time. So we've got this site, and one of the things, so what I've done with it is I've actually created a couple of different things from it. One is a site design. So you'll notice that there's a demo base site design, that's the name I've given it, that will create all of those artifacts that I just ran through really quickly. So if I run this on this site, all of these things already exist, so it's not going to do anything, but if there were anything missing, it would actually create those particular pieces of information architecture. Let's see how that works though under the covers. How do we get to this point? So I'm going to run through site designs rather quickly because I'd rather focus more on the PnP provisioning templates. Site designs are great, but you've heard my misgivings about them. So let me just sort of run through some stuff that I can do with them that I explained before. So here I'm going to do an export of the information architecture based on some data that I'm providing to this particular script. So what I want to do is export the property property library and get the definition of that. So that happened pretty fast, and I'm using export site script from list, and I end up with something that looks something like this. So here are the site columns, here are the content types, here are a bunch of content types, sorry. I create the list, I add the content types to that list, and then I set up the views on that particular list. In this case, I have 2 views. So this is what's called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, and this is one representation of the definition of what it is I've set up in this particular site and chosen to export. So you notice that this is just for that properties library. Then what I do is I actually copy that and sort of skinny it down, remove some stuff that I know that I don't need from this this site script, and I also add this sort of base piece of schema that I use to add a navigation link called to that properties library on the left side, and then I combine those two together using this script, and if I run it, it's actually going to reinstantiate the site design called demo base, and what it's doing is actually registering the separate site scripts and then registering the site design that contains those two. I've written a little library of utility functions that helps me bundle that stuff together and be able to recreate it or reapply it without ending up with duplicates and stuff like that. All of this code will be available. I'll have a link at the end of the demonstration. One last thing about site design. So the way I can use them sort of in a general sense is I decided I'm going to create a team site, and I can choose that particular site design, and I'm going to call this PnP 88, and I'm just going to say next, and then let this finish. And what's going to happen is that site design will be applied to the site right after its creation. So you'll notice that I get a message applying site design. We're updating it based on the design I chose, and then there's the logic that you saw in that JSON file. So that's how site designs work. You can apply them through the UI. You saw how easy that was. So it's great for end users, excuse me, or site owners to apply that information architecture. The site design is all done. I let it refresh, and there's my property library with all the settings that I have from the original information architecture site. Okay, now let's look at the PnP provisioning template idea. Now these templates can do a lot more than I'm going to cover here. I'm really going to focus on just creating that document library, applying the content, creating the content types in the site columns, and applying it to a new site. So once again, we're using some PowerShell to make all this happen. In this case, this is the get PnP provisioning template module that I've written. So what this will do is actually look at the site. So it's that information architecture site again, and it's going to export or build a file that I'm giving an out to, and it's going to create a file that I tend to call the raw XML. So it's exactly what's in the site. and it's it's what I start with when I start to sort of customize what the template will do. I can also create a configuration, which is really nice, because what that lets me do is say to this provisioning engine, this is the stuff that I want you to export for me. I want the web settings, I want the navigation, I want the fields, those are the site columns, I want the content types, the lists, the pages. Do I want the navigation to do certain things? There's a whole schema behind this. And you'll notice that I can specify sort of what targets I want this engine to work with. I want it to export the property list. I don't want the documents library. I don't want the site assets library. So I can set it up so that I only grab the stuff that I want, which is really nice. So again, connecting to that sort of template site that I've got, and then doing the exporting the provisioning template. And I'll just run that, and you can just sort of see how it starts firing off and what it looks like. So you'll see it's like any other SharePoint, or sorry, a PowerShell module. It tends to use this sort of blue interactive box, and it shows me what it's doing as it's going along. It's exporting the content types, it's exporting the lists, it's exporting the other aspects of the site that I've asked it to export. So that happened pretty quickly, and what I end up with is this provisioning template, which is an XML file, and it's exactly what I've asked for in that particular site. Now, you have to be able to speak XML, just like you had to speak JSON in the other example, but one of the nice things I find is if you know how these sites are built, if you understand how SharePoint sites work and what lists and libraries are, it makes some decent sense. Now, I'm not saying that makes it easy. I'm just saying that it's something that you can probably figure out looking through it. So for example, what navigation am I asking it to create? Well, I want it to set up these links on the quick launch. This is the current navigation, I'm sorry, the structural navigation. The global navigation is at the top. I'm not doing anything with that. The current navigation is this list of stuff here. So the net new is that I'm going to create a sub node for documents called property, just like what you saw when I applied that site design. We're going to create some site fields. Again, it's XML, so it looks like a lot of gobbledygook if you don't understand what it all does, but it's exactly what's set up in that site in order to make things work. What content types do I want? Well, I want to create the content type called inspection report, and I want it to have these fields, and I've got a couple of custom fields like the inspection type, and the other one is the inspection date, I believe. So all of this is the definition of what's going on in that site expressed in XML instead of the JSON we saw before. Now, one of the really nice things about this is we can actually create pages, and that was one of the distinctions that I made when I talked through some of the pros and cons of each one of these things. So let's skip over to the template that I'm actually going to use. It's the same stuff from the raw one, but I've done a couple of things. For instance, I've said I want the site title to be set to the parameter that I'm going to pass in called site title. And so I can actually set up tokens or parameters inside the template that get replaced as it's applied to a site. That's something that site designs don't do. So that's pretty slick. And then also I can do the pages thing. So if you notice below the lists node, I have client-side pages, and so I'm going to take the home page that you get out of the box, and I'm going to add some web parts to it. So I'm not going to change the news web part; that's still going to be there. But I'm going to add a quick links. I'm going to add a custom SharePoint framework web part. I'm going to add a planner web part, etc. So I can actually do quite a bit with the home page inside this PnP provisioning template that I can't do with a site design, which makes it really powerful. So to apply it, and again, this is just some more PowerShell. So a lot of this is just connecting to things, getting information about the hub site, because I'm going to connect to associate the new site with a hub site. I create the site title and the property code. I'm going to make that number 5 because I've been creating these for a while in testing. In this particular PowerShell script, I've chosen to create the site myself in PowerShell, but you can actually do that in a PnP provisioning template. I'm going to create the site and then apply the information architecture, which is really my focus here, by applying the provisioning template. So you notice I set up these parameters, the hub site name, the site title, and the property code. This is a set of property sites. And then I apply that provisioning template to the new site. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to create PnP 5. I probably will pause here because there are a couple places where it sort of takes a few moments to get its job done. Now it's created the site, which took a little longer than usual, so I sort of cut that part out. But now you notice that it's applying that template. So it's taking that XML that's in the template and it's applying the instructions. It's following that recipe. So it's creating the content types. There's the inspection report. It's creating another content type called floor plan, another called property photo. So now it's creating the property list. So it just sort of marches through this stuff, much like a site design does, which you see through the UI. Here it's just happening in PowerShell. One of the nice things about being able to do things this way is, and I set this up frequently, is I might have a list of properties in the properties hub, and I just add an item there, and then or multiple items there, and then I run this, and it creates all of the sites that don't yet have a site. So it's a great way to automate this whole process. Now what I'm going to end up with is I have this site, PnP5. That's how I determine the URL. That's a parameter that I passed into the PowerShell, so that's the name of the site I got. Now you notice it's already got some of this done. I asked it to change the home page and add these quick links to various document libraries. I'm not creating all of those document libraries, but I am creating the property operations one. So the script is actually done. You notice there's no more blue stuff going on there. And so now I have a site that's got a customized homepage. I've added this quick links. I've actually added a planner web part here. There's an error in the way this gets set up, but it definitely is a planner web part, and as soon as that plan is created, it would show it to me. And then I have that property library. So same setup that I had with the site designs, but doing it with the PnP provisioning template. Now because I passed in some parameters to this particular script, you notice I'm passing in parameters, and it's the $params that I set up here. The params are which hub site, what do I want the site title to be, and what do I want the property code to be. So the property code in this case is what I'm using for the alias, the slash site slash something. It actually gets the value of the property code, and you'll notice that I said PnP5 up here. So we can set more things more easily. We're at sort of an extra level of automation, and we can also make changes that we can't make with a site design. Again, my favorite is that we can make changes to the home page. We could create new pages. We could we could pre-populate some news stories. We could do all kinds of things that we can't do with site designs. That is all the time I have. These sessions are very quick. We absolutely want to hear your feedback. This is our first PnP conference, virtual conference, and we'd love to do more, but only if it makes sense. So let us know what you think about this session and, of course, the event as a whole. As promised, there are some links here that you might be interested in. Microsoft 365 Community Docs, which is my contribution to the whole PnP effort. Would love to see you either visit there for reading or contributions. The general PnP Patterns and Practices website is, of course, where you can get access to all of the PnP efforts. And then finally, my link at the bottom there, simpmark.news/demos, where you'll find the code for these demos. If you have any questions, please just ping me and I'll help you out.